Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to the Horror Master YouTube channel, and welcome back to a brand new series that I've been trying to think for the longest time. And it's a series that I hope it gets some legs eventually as time goes on with this series. This series actually came to mind for a long time ago, being that, of course, me being a big metalhead, as time has gone on, you come across some of the most disturbing, some of those weird, some of the most odd album covers in all of rock and metal. And some of these album covers have gotten a sort of cult following, or to the point that they're being banned, taken off the shelves, and released for brand new album covers, so on and so forth. So this series is gonna be tackling every the majority, or maybe all of them, depending on how I'm going to do this, are the most controversial album covers in rock and metal history. Each video I'm going to dedicate an entire video to an album cover, talking about the history of the album cover, maybe the history of the band, the impact it had when it was released, and the impact that it might still have today. Some of the album covers throughout this entire series might be album covers that are the most obvious ones, others that you never thought were controversial, other albums that you thought were controversial at the time but have become too controversial lately, or were controversial at the time but not controversial during this time of the recording of this video. So like I said, I'm gonna try my best to think of how I'm gonna do this series. So this is gonna be the first episode on episode one, and of course with episode one there were so many albums I could have chosen to be the first episode, and probably by the cover of the video, kind of know which one I chose. And honestly, this was the first album that I actually thought about it as being the first entry in this new series. And of course, I'm talking about Dawn of the Blackhearts by Norwegian black metal band Mayhem, released on February 17, 1995 by War Master Records. So, if you've been living under a rock for the past maybe 30 years, Mayhem is a Norwegian black metal band who has been regarded as one of the greatest black metal bands of all time, and one of the founding fathers of the Norwegian black metal scene, next to Dark Throne, Burzum, Emperor, so on and so forth. So this album cover, the reason why this album cover I chose it to be as the most controversial album cover, in my personal opinion, is because, well, you can kind of see why. But I'm gonna explain the history of how this album cover came to be. So before we do that, we gotta go back to the way at the beginning, to, of course, kind of how the events leading up to this album cover and the aftermath of what happened after this album cover. So kind of the history of the band in some sort of way. So this started off with, of course, with a young Swedish guy named Peder Olin, other known as Dead, and of course Oystein Aste, also known as Euronymous. We know from history, we know from the books, that Dead was a very depressive person. I mean, to the point that he would go up on stage and literally cut himself while performing, which at the time was nobody would ever do. Of course, later on, bands like Watain, Mayhem itself, or Gorgoroth incorporated that kind of aesthetic that Dead, you know, brought into Norwegian black metal, and kind of made it a common thing, which is still kind of weird, and have the balls for somebody to cut themselves on stage, which is kind of, a different realm of its own. But with Dead itself, he was always fascinated with Dead, even though he, as a child, there's a lot of stories and how this happened. Some people say he was bullied, and one of the accidents, or he had an accident in a car. You know, after, we don't know what story it is, but we know that he had an accident as a child, and he's always been fascinated with Dead, to the point that before every performance, the night before, he would bury his clothes in dirt, let them all overnight with the rain and all that, let them just being covered in dead, and he would wear it on stage, and it would smell dead. And of course, eventually we learned for long that Euronymous was kind of a bit of a prick and a bit of a hypocrite. If you kind of know the story of Euronymous, he would bully Dead to the point that, things Dead wouldn't actually, wouldn't handle it. Even though at the time it was the 90s, things as like taking like mental illness wasn't as known as it is today. So that's kind of a bit of unfortunate. But on the events of Peleolin, of course, on the infamous day of April 8, 1991, is when he committed his suicide. He cut himself in the arms, cut his throat, and before dying, he actually wrote the lyrics, a suicide note, to, of course, Live Eternal, and he was still fucking alive while he was doing that. So he decided to, you know, get a shotgun and shoot himself in the brain and splatter all over, brain splatter over the walls and all that. So, and by the time the Euronymous got into the Mayhem house, he couldn't get into the front door because it was locked. So he had to go from a ladder into a window, break in. And when he saw Euronymous, I mean, Dead's body just laying there, like any other human being, our first reaction would be call an ambulance, somebody to, an ambulance, call 911. He actually thought, instead of doing that, he actually went to a store, bought a video camera, and started taking pictures of the album cover. Now, how fucked up is that for one of your friends being dead in the middle of the bedroom, and the first thing you decide is to, hey, I gotta take a picture of it and save him for my own personal fucking reasons, which I don't know what the fuck it is, but it's kind of shocking and thing that Euronymous, instead of calling for help, calling an ambulance, calling the hospital, calling the police, he decides to take a photograph of the album cover. And not only that, but he actually got the shotgun and he got the knife and put it in the frame of the album cover, which I'm pretty sure this whole album cover has been put in somewhere in this area, but it's just crazy to think that Euronymous had the balls. Not really the balls, he had the audacity to do this, which thinks out how fucked up Euronymous was in his own as a person. Like I said, a bit of a prick and hypocrite, but that's beside the point. So this happens, and of course, Mayhem was without a vocalist, and of course comes the infamous story of supposedly Euronymous eating a piece of Dead's brain, which of course that was debunked, and of course the other story of him making necklaces out of Dead's skull, which was also debunked. We later found out it was chicken bone, to the point that Necrobutcher, the bassist of Mayhem, left the band because he couldn't fathom the point that something like this happened to one of his closest friends. I mean, because Dead and Necrobutcher were probably the closest to each other, next to probably Hellhammer and Euronymous were closer to each other. But in case of this case, Dead and Necrobutcher were so close together, they were like sort of best friends. But to know that your best friend shot himself in the dead, and your guitarist decides to take a fucking picture, well, like I said, at the time, he thought it was his actual skull and make necklaces out of it. Necrobutcher was like, fuck it, I had enough. I'm leaving the fucking band. Or he got fired, depending on Euronymous' stories and all that. But he fucking left the band. He couldn't deal with it. He couldn't deal with the fact that his best friend died and Euronymous did this. So Necrobutcher left the band. And of course, Mayhem was without a bassist. Of course, we found a certain Bart Vikernes took on as the bassist, and of course, the death of Euronymous happened in 1993, and those pictures were never left to light at the time, or so we thought. So the story goes that supposedly Euronymous was a pen pal with somebody from South Africa, and he sent one of the pictures from Euronymous from Dead's corpse to somebody in South Africa, and this guy was like, what the fuck is this? He sent it to the record label, or so the story it is. Like I said, some of the stories are, we don't know all the facts. It could be true, it could be lies, it could be a mix of both, depending on how you want to interpret the story. But it's crazy to think that somebody had the audacity to take a picture of your dead corpse. Show some fucking respect, man. I mean, come on, that was your lead vocalist. And lo and behold, years have gone by. The myth of this album cover has become so big to the point that, like I said, I consider it, along some other metalheads out there that might agree or disagree with me, as one of the most controversial, not the most controversial album cover ever in existence, because it's a real picture. It's not a painting. It's not like a Photoshop. It's not like monsters. It is gory, but it is so realistic because it is an actual fucking picture of a dead corpse. So it's kind of fathom to me that to this day, we still talk about him. To the point I'm making this fucking video shows that how much this album cover is still talked about to this day. And it is an album that I would like eventually to have it on the collection, not just because it is a real recorded album. I mean, it's a bootleg. It's pretty much just live tracks of of songs, of course, from the band's history. But the fact that this is a historical event, and not just in metal, but in Norwegian black metal and black metal of its own, because after that picture of that, Norwegian black metal was beginning to kind of became more dangerous, of course, with the church burnings, the infamous killing of the homosexual by Faust, and then of course the killing of Euronymous and the imprisonment of Varg. That was kind of like the beginning of the end of the Norwegian black metal scene of its soul, even though the Norwegian black metal is more about the music, but the stories of the Norwegian black metal scene is what kind of makes this whole scene somewhat one of the craziest scenes in all of metal history. If you guys want more information about the Norwegian black metal scene, on the Horseman podcast, we did an episode dedicated to the Norwegian black metal scene. We're talking about, all the bands, the albums, this album cover, and briefly the Lords of Chaos book, the Lords of Chaos film, everything about Norwegian black metal. So you want more information on that, I really suggest y'all to watch the video because it is a really informative video. But you know, there was no other album that could have started this series with the Donald Blackhearts album, because, like I mentioned before, my personal opinion, the most controversial album cover in rock and in metal. It might be the most controversial album cover of all time. And then again, there might be some other ones that may be explicit. But to me, Donald Blackhearts, in my personal opinion, the most controversial album cover in all of rock and metal history. And that does it for the video, guys. I hope you guys really enjoy this new video. Like I said, I'm gonna try to kind of bring you guys a different kind of video like this every single week. I'm trying to think of other controversial album covers I'm gonna do later down the future. I know for one of them it's gonna be Scorpion's The Virgin Killer, maybe Slayer's God Hates Us All album cover. Like I said, depending on how this video does, I might continue doing more album covers. So let me know down in the comments what you think of this video, what you think of the series, any album covers you would like me to discuss, because I really wanna get more feedback on this. So let me know down in the comments, guys. I would really appreciate it. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. You guys should bang. Don't forget to follow me on my Instagram. Don't forget to follow me on my Twitter. And like I said, hope you guys are really enjoying this new brand new series I'm gonna bring you guys. Like I said, let me know down in the comments your opinion. Thank you guys for watching. Stay safe, everyone. And until next time, stay metal.